After a somewhat disappointing season for Mizzou football fans, Laird Veatch expects you to pay more money next season. How does that taste? Let's talk about that right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And on today's program, I'm going to talk about the future and the present of the quarterback position for the Tigers, and also an unusually important opener for Missouri basketball tonight in Memphis. But to me, the thing I want to start with today is Laird Veatch. I almost got through an episode without mixing up Missouri's athletic director with the Kansas City Chiefs general manager, but darn it, I could not pull it off. But Laird Veatch, of course, the Missouri athletic director, was interviewed recently, and the pull-away quote was that Missouri fans can expect, quote, significant ticket price increases next season for Mizzou football. And I'll just say this, I admired that Leach was honest about it and forthright and said really exactly what needed to be said from Missouri's perspective, because it is understandable from Missouri's end. Of course, if you compare Missouri to the rest of the SEC, of course, we are lagging behind in terms of revenue. There is no question about that. But at the same time, as a fan, I get it. I sit around all the fans in the South End Zone, many of which are season ticket holders like myself, and I could totally understand why many of those people would think that's a really tough pill to swallow after a relatively disappointing 2024. Of course, we're still 2/3 of the season. We've got 1/3 of the season to go, I should say here. So obviously much of Missouri's story here in 2024 is yet to be written here. And while the college football playoff looks slim, I think we can all agree there's a massive difference in perception heading into next season based on a 10-2 record versus a 6-6 record for next season. So all of this is why, in my opinion, 2024 was and remains such a critical season for the future of the Missouri football program. Because no matter what happened this season, I think these significant ticket increases were coming one way or the other. So obviously there's going to be a huge impact on ticket retention, season ticket retention in this environment, because it's not as though, while a lot of football fans have gotten used to prices going up to attend live sports over the last couple decades. Well, obviously, recently, without getting too deeply into politics on this election week or anything like that, the obvious reality is it's not just football prices that have gone up. So working families are going to have to make decisions. How much do we really want to have a winning football program? How much do I really value watching these games in person when all of them are now on fabulous high-definition television? This is a real challenge for Missouri and every business, every program in the country right now. And really, it's just, that's why 2024 remains such a big season. That's why these last 4 games are huge. Whether Missouri has a realistic chance of making the college football playoff or not, these last 4 games are really critical for 2025 and beyond, of course, to 2026, when Missouri is really going to try to squeeze every bit of revenue it can out of the live ticket purchaser, when many, many more premium seating options will become available in that 2026 season. This whole North End Zone complex reimagining, if you will. This is a huge deal for Missouri. And if they're going to pull all of this off, this rather ambitious plan, well, finishing the 2024 season on a strong note is going to go a heck of a long way because, once again, I think regardless of what happened this season, regardless of how you think the first 2/3 of this season have gone for Missouri football so far, I think it's pretty obvious that these significant ticket prices were coming one way or the other. I think in order for Missouri to continue to compete at a high level in the SEC, well, they're going to have to retain a lot of those fans. It's going to be a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. And I totally understand on every individual level. If you decide, you know what, the heck with this, this is too much money. It's getting ridiculous at this point. I can just watch the games on television. It's hard for me to argue with that. It really is. Just know that collectively, as Missouri fans, if we're not going to spend, well, there is going to be some consequences to that on the field, almost certainly. Interestingly, in the AP Top 25 this past week, 10 teams lost. And yet, the Tigers, despite being on a bye week, dropped out of the Top 25. Though I have to say, it's a little bit tough to get outraged. I understand why Missouri fans are confused, maybe a little bit annoyed at this fact, especially when Missouri, well, it dropped quite a few times after winning previously in this season as well. But to me, I just don't think Missouri, especially with question marks at quarterback right now, injury-wise, it's just hard for me to get too upset at the Tigers not being in the top 25. I don't think Missouri has played like a top 25 team so far for the most part, especially not on the road. There's no question that Missouri has been a different team at home versus away this season. But Speaking of Brady Cook and the Missouri quarterback situation, by the way, Eli Drinkwitz recently did sound optimistic that Cook will be able to return this season. His high ankle sprain, also an upper body injury as well, looked like a wrist or hand injury that Cook suffered apparently against Alabama a couple weeks ago. But this week, will Brady Cook be available against Oklahoma? That seems like a bit of a long shot, though who really knows at this point? Eli Drinkwitz doesn't have a lot of incentive to be honest with us on this one, or at least incredibly forthcoming. I do think, as others have pointed out, Cook, if he were ruled out, if he were truly out for the season, if Missouri knew that there was no chance he were coming back this season, I think they'd tell us that. But as far as a week-to-week type of player, which Cook is, I think, at this point, there really is no incentive for Missouri to tell much about Cook's injuries other than to list him as questionable or doubtful, whatever their chosen designation might be, to simply make the SEC injury gods, the protocols, just to satisfy them and make them happy. That's all that really matters at this point. But so anyway, long story short, we're just going to have to say, you know what? We'll just have to see with Brady Cook. Sorry, my screen is distracting me with commercial real estate problems right now. I apologize. But let's keep talking about the quarterback position here a little bit, because the future of the quarterback position, well, we hope right now, is Matt Zollers, a 5-star quarterback, been committed to Missouri for a few months now. Well, he did take an official visit to Penn State this past weekend, and my original, a Pennsylvania product, by the way, not an insignificant visit there whatsoever, but according to writer Chad Simmons, well, Zollers still locked in. Hey, it's locked on, actually, thank you very much, but still locked in with the Tigers after his visit to Happy Valley and to see Penn State take on Ohio State this week. Zollers says, my commitment to Missouri is strong because of my relationship with all of the coaches there. So if anything, you'd get worried about Zollers, maybe if some of his significant assistant coaches were recruiting him, that maybe they moved on from Missouri this offseason for whatever reason. But as soon as I heard about this, I just felt like, hey, if you're Matt Zollers, honestly, you only get to be a high school recruit one time. Even if you know with 100% certainty you're still going to Missouri, why not go get wined and dined at Penn State and Georgia and wherever else? If they want to take you for a visit, why not? Sounds like a good time on campus for a high schooler to me. And Mizzou basketball opens up later tonight against Memphis at the FedEx Forum. And while this is not a must-win, it's probably a more important game than you might be imagining. Let's talk about that here in just a second. But first, our friends over at 5 Hour Energy know that being passionate about football isn't just a hobby, it's a way of life. It takes a lot of energy to power through all-day tailgates, touchdown celebrations, or even that agonizing second overtime, as Mizzou fans know all too well. Well, that's why 5 Hour Energy has created Stan the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel, the energy shot made just for the super fans like you, the fans who are the first in the parking lot and the last to leave. Hey, we see you. We definitely do. So, 5 Hour Energy knows no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're prepping for the big tailgate or ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is always a mile long. That's why the limited edition Stan the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot is here to help keep you fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with 5 Hour Energy. Available on 5hourenergy.com, shipped nationwide. Now, at first glance, the first of 31 regular season Missouri basketball games this season may not seem like the most important thing in the world, but when you really break down Missouri's non-conference schedule, other than the game against Kansas, of course, at home, the usual bragging rights game, well, other than that, also California at home as well. Really only Memphis provides any. First of all, it's the only true road game that Missouri is going to play in the non-conference season, but it's also really for about a month the only important game that the Tigers are going to play. This is going to be a true litmus test for where the Tigers stand, I think, early in the season. And also, if the Tigers are going to make the NCAA tournament, well, this is not a must-win, but it's definitely a really important win for the resume. You may remember the Tigers led by 7 at halftime when Missouri took on Memphis at home early in last season, but then the team just completely fell off a cliff, couldn't do anything offensively, couldn't get any stops either, ultimately losing that second half by 22 and the game by 15. And naturally, since I've decided Peyton Marshall, I'm his biggest fan, despite he has not even stepped foot on a college basketball court yet. So obviously one of the things I'm going to be looking for tonight is how does Missouri use its centers? Is this going to be a, hey, we're always going to have a big guy in there type of team? Or is this going to be more like Dennis Gates' first season when Noah Carter and Kobe Brown were your two forwards, but Missouri never really played a true center for the most part in that season? Also, I want to see, does Missouri look better defensively? Because so far under Gates, while, well, in terms of results, there couldn't have been a bigger gap between year one and year two under Dennis Gates at Missouri. Defensively, both of those teams statistically were equally, well, mediocre at best. I would say rather below average by SEC standards. So does Missouri look better defensively? Are they able to at least get close to earning the rebounding battle, having a similar rebounding battle with the Memphis Tigers tonight? All of those type of questions, that's what I'm going to be looking for. Now, I will say it's encouraging from at least one of Missouri's returning leaders in Tamar Bates. He says on Missouri's team, the team identity, not even specifically asked about the Missouri defense, but what I liked is Tamar said, quote, the identity of this team, what we've been building since this summer is just being a defensive-minded team. So, sure, at this point, that's a lot of lip service. Obviously, we as people from the Show Me State will believe it when we see it, especially after how Missouri's performed defensively its first 2 years under Gates. But I like hearing that. I like that Missouri is taking it seriously. That tells me that there is at least an acknowledgement from the entire program that we've got to be better on that side of the basketball. Dennis Gates is an offensive-minded guy, especially when it comes to recruiting, I believe, and I'm okay with that. I've always said, hey, recruit offense first, but then you got to coach defense, I think. I think you got to find guys who are coachable or willing to work hard, and I think based on what I've seen so far, I think Missouri has a lot of those guys on this roster. It's just going to be a matter of the entire team buying into an actual defensive mentality. But also from the coaching perspective, I think Missouri needs to be better, just better principles, less gambling. I know that Dennis Gates likes to be disruptive on the defensive end, but as Bates says here, our mentality that we want to take on being defense is tough, physical, and disruptive. That all sounds great. Disruptive, well, you don't want to be disruptive at the expense of getting out of position, of gambling for steals far too often. Then your rebounders are out of position because they're having to overhelp. All of this kind of good stuff. And also physical defense sounds great. It's great, but you also have to be able to defend without fouling as well. So that's another thing I'm going to look at too. The free throw attempts tonight. That's something last season that Missouri, time and time again, was getting beat simply at the line. And not because they were a bad free throw shooting team overall last year. The other teams would just simply draw way more fouls, especially at the rim. Missouri was a challenged team on the perimeter size-wise and keeping their man in front of them often. So that's going to be a big part of the defense as well. Can Missouri keep the other team off of the free throw line? And of course, conversely, offensively, the Tigers probably need to do a better job of getting to the free throw line as well. Obviously, if you're not knocking down a high percentage of your jump shots, getting to the foul line is going to make up for some of that. And of course, I'm obviously going to be watching all of the newcomers, all of the freshmen, including Peyton Marshall and Honor Boateng, just getting a feel for all of these new guys. But probably the most important newcomer of all, in my opinion, has got to be the former Duke Blue Devil, Mark Mitchell. I think if Missouri is going to hit whatever its ultimate ceiling is this season, the best version of itself, I think that Mark Mitchell probably has to hit his ceiling and be the best version of himself this season as well. So far, I'd say the returns are pretty encouraging because Mitchell really is kind of a do-it-all player, in my opinion, a guy who needs to shoot the ball better, needs to hit three-pointers more consistently in particular. Well, the fact that his shot mechanics look better already this offseason to me compared to at Duke, this may have been a smart transfer for Mark Mitchell there, because if Dennis Gates and his staff can really improve that outside shot by Mitchell, as they did for Kobe Brown, as they did for Sean East in particular, those two guys, but others as well, like Demoy Hodge, just not quite to the extreme, well, Mitchell is going to really improve his pro prospects as well. So this could hopefully will be a real win-win for Mitchell and Missouri this season. And, while the Missouri offense, in terms of the gridiron this fall for Mizzou, has been a real disappointment, the defense has been okay. I think it's been pretty good, but if they've underachieved at all, I think Power Mizzou's Gerard Hamilton gave us a pretty good breakdown of why that is this season. So I want to talk about that coming up in just a little bit. But first, FanDuel. Let's get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch during the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. By the way, I should point out not just the Missouri men, but the Missouri women opening up on the road tonight as well. So a nice little basketball doubleheader as the Tigers take on the Vermont Catamounts. Yes, my beloved Vermont. Really, Pat Lynch's beloved Vermont, a recent guest on this program. One of my good buddies from college, still lives up in Vermont, the old stomping grounds. But an interesting road game for Missouri to start the season with women's basketball as well, 5 p.m. on ESPN Plus here locally for those of you who are subscribers. But back to football here for just a little bit. Gerard Hamilton over at Power Mizzou. If you're disappointed in the Missouri defense at all, well, I think there's a pretty good indication of why. Missouri tied for 15th, that's second to last in the SEC in pressures so far. I've pointed out that, hey, it's not always about sacks. It's about getting pressure on the quarterback. Well, Missouri simply has not been good enough in that regard so far based on those numbers. To give you an idea, some context here, 47 pressures so far, 2/3 of the way through the season. Last season, in a full season, the Tigers had 124. So again, 124 last season, full season, 2/3 of the way this year, only 47. That is a massive, massive difference. There is no doubt about that. And finally, on Missouri basketball, by the way, Tony Perkins last week, well, he was held out of the Missouri exhibition game against Lincoln. That caused a lot of consternation among some Missouri fans. How serious is this injury? Well, I would say not all that serious, considering Perkins was back practicing last week, according to Coach Gates. So I would expect Tony Perkins to make his Missouri debut along with a whole bunch of new Tigers tonight as well. And when it comes to predictions, really for tonight and for this season, I'm right with the people who are throwing up their hands and saying, "What do you want from me?" I don't. There's just too many different variables here for Missouri. Too many new faces for me to feel really confident about picking anything one way or the other, positively or negatively. I'll say this: I tend to be an optimistic guy, especially this time of year when it comes to Mizzou hoops or Mizzou football, for that matter. I do like the vibes so far for Missouri basketball. I'll say that. This team seems like they get along. They seem like they're having fun based on what I've seen. A lot of good personalities on the team that seem to be meshing pretty well so far. Again, there's your vibe check, not exactly an advanced statistical or basketball analysis there. But when it comes to the vibes, hey, probably matters in basketball as much as any sport. So I'm not going to completely dismiss that variable. Just a tough one to actually quantify, that's for sure. But hey, thanks for joining me here on Locked On Mizzou, and thanks for putting up with a couple distractions today during the episode. I'm in crunch time of a major commercial real estate project that has been ongoing for like a year and a half here, so that's why I missed Thursday and Friday of last week. But hopefully gonna have a full boat here as we come into the Oklahoma Sooners game. Should be a fun ball game on Saturday. Hopefully it's been a fun podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. For your second listen, also check out Locked On SEC with Chris Gordy on YouTube and wherever you get audio podcasts as well. So until next time, I'm John Miller, and thanks for listening to Locked On Mizzou.